Thank you, everybody, for joining. We get a lot of people who register for this, and sometimes people can attend live and sometimes they cannot. So I never know how many people are actually going to show up during the actual live part of this. So thank you for those of you who are here. We're doing another one. I'm saying we. I usually work with a lot of interns and students and so on. Today I'm flying solo. So we're welcoming you to another one of our free monthly wellness webinars. Today we're going to be talking about nutrition facts and food labels. I have to say, I feel like I over delivered in this one. So I'm gonna have to keep my eye on the time because I can't just go on and on forever. I definitely have to wrap it up at a certain point. But what I think I'm going to focus on is just like a high level view of a lot of different things and provide you with some new information too. Maybe it's new. And this way it'll prepare you to be an educated consumer going forward. And then maybe what I'll do next year is I'll do a part 2 workshop and go a little bit more into detail into some of these topics, these items. So hopefully some of the takeaways from today, objectives that you can see in front of you, not only understanding how to read and understand food labels and identifying certain things, but also we're going to share a little bit of information about if you are managing a chronic condition and how to keep that in mind as well. So a couple of housekeeping things here. As I'm sure you heard when you entered in to the session, we are recording this because, like I said, we always get lots of people signing up to register, but not everybody can make it live. So that is what the recording is for. You can use the chat box, and I might actually even engage in some conversation during the webinar itself. But hopefully, if the timing goes well, we'll have some time at the end for a formal Q&A, or you can always email me if you want to. I always like to disclaim this is for general information and education purposes only. It is not medical advice. So please make sure that you're working with your own personal individual healthcare providers if there's anything that you need to take into consideration. And then finally, since you registered, we have your email address on file. And that means that I will send you a blast out with the follow-up email for this, where we give you the recording and the survey and the link for next month's webinar. But I also keep you on my list. So you'll get a newsletter every month or so. If you want to opt out, you can always opt out. This is me. If we've never met before, hello, my name is Dina D'Alessandro. I am a registered dietitian nutritionist. I'm actually coming to you live from my campus health center, where I'm the campus dietitian up here at Lehman College in the Bronx in New York City. So I'm very excited to be back on campus for this semester. I'm also an adjunct lecturer here on the campus as well. And I also run a part-time private practice. And you can see all of my other credentials and experiences listed on the slide there. I want to start off just by saying, whenever you're looking at food labels or things that have a label on them, we're talking about packaged goods. And a lot of times people automatically just default to what is known as, processed foods. So we'll probably talk a little bit more about this in another webinar at some point in the future. But just to define what a processed food is, it's quite literally anything that goes through a procedure that alters the food from its natural state. So as you can see on the left-hand side, some things that you probably identify as processed foods are things like snack items, etc. But things on the right-hand side are also processed as well. They're in a package, they've been washed, they've been treated in some way, ground up beef, or created in a container. So these are all things that are going to be having labels on them. There are exemptions to having labels, and those are some single ingredient items, like you wouldn't see necessarily a nutrition fact label on an orange, or anything that's open in the produce section, like a head of lettuce. Anything in very small packages, like herbs and spices, usually don't have a nutrition fact label on them either. Also, certain facilities like restaurants and small businesses, depending on how many locations they have, they do not have to comply by putting a nutrition fact label on them. And same thing if you're doing like fundraisers or other outset events, mom and pop shops, things like that. Alcoholic beverages, I think, is on that list as well. So some things you'll have information and some things and we'll talk a little bit more about the ones that you don't have information for later. So let's start just by sharing with you what the anatomy of a label is. I promise you, I am a science nerd. I went through 200 pages of looking through all the stuff that is important and very specific when it comes to how food manufacturers create labels for their products. So as you can see here, I'm not going to read all of that there, but there's got to be information represented on the label itself. And I didn't put this on here, but in that 200-page report, it even goes into detail as to like the type of font and the size, etc. So these things are so that the consumer can understand what's happening. And also, if there's an issue with the product, a consumer knows how to contact the manufacturer and make a report of anything like, that's an issue. If they have like a dented can or they want to, talk or file a complaint. Speaking of dented cans and things like that, obviously there's also the the criteria here of making sure you have a sell-by date or an expiration, and whether or not that food needs to be handled in a certain way, like refrigerate after opening. In 2016, we had the Food and Drug Administration and the U.S. Department of, I should say, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA, they revamped and revised their nutrition facts label. So this has been in the system now for a while. So this might be something that you're familiar with looking at, but you can see kind of where they adjusted some things. And fun fact, even the public could have a say in this. So the FDA opens up their conferences to comment, to public comment. So if you receive information from your government, you would maybe have seen something like this that you can say, the type is a little bit small. I'd like to see this thing pulled out. And you can notice, again, some of the things will go into detail in the slides to come, but you can see the added sugars used to not be there and now it is. And there's been some change in what we call the micronutrients, those vitamins and minerals in the bottom, because as we have research that updates, we notice that there are different things that were taken into account or things that no longer have to be present on the label anymore. So if you feel like it, you can add in the chat, what is it that you look for when you're shopping? Like, are you purposely looking at food labels for any particular reason or something that you're keeping in mind when you're shopping? So you can drop that in the chat. For purpose of time, I'm going to move through, and maybe you said some of this stuff. I'm going to focus on what is known as the big three. So that's serving size, calories, and nutrients. I'll give a little guidance as I advance through the slides here. The first thing is the serving size. This is quite arbitrary. This is just based on what is reflected as a typical amount that somebody might eat of this product, not something that you have to eat. And quite honestly, if you know your appetite, your hunger cues, how active you are over the course of the day, if you work with a dietitian, you probably know maybe I only need half of this much, or I need twice as much in order to satisfy me and create a balanced meal for myself. The packages can have more than one serving. So if you have, in this case, it says 8 servings per container. So if you eat 2 servings at the size that is indicated there, that nutrition fact label underneath it is per serving. So you would double the calories, double the sodium, double the protein if you're keeping track of those types of things. Next up, we have calories. So that is the energy, that is kind of like the gas, the fuel in the body of you, the car that is your body. And this is what provides us with the body's functions as well. So as you can see on the slide, these are your carbs, your fats, and your proteins. Those are the only things that will give you the actual calories. And a good rule of thumb here, because I know a lot of people sometimes will look at calories and be like, oh, I need less than this, or I'm looking at 100-calorie snack option. If you think of it in terms of 100 calories equals about an hour's worth of energy, then you can make informed decisions. If it's going to be a really long time before you eat your next meal, then maybe you need more than the 100 calories to fill that space. And we'll talk a little bit too about the balance within the nutrients there of what that means as far as creating a satisfactory, something that keeps you fuller longer. The next thing on here, just to keep an eye out for, is that sometimes if a food item is less than 5 calories, it can actually qualify as calorie-free or 0 calories. So again, if you're eating more than just the indicated serving size, make sure you're doubling or tripling that stuff up. If it's 4 calories and you're not seeing it listed as such on the label, that could be 20 or 30 calories more during the course of the day that you weren't necessarily expecting to eat. And then next up here, we have the nutrients. So now not just the macronutrients are listed, carbs, fats, and proteins, but a variety of other nutrients, substances, and the vitamins and minerals are listed there as well. So in this particular item is where I kind of want to just point out, I have a little note. Take a look at the carbs, right? You have 37 grams of carbs, then you have 8 grams of total fat and 3 grams of protein. So this is a very carb-dense food item. If you're trying to be mindful of your carbohydrates, you could opt out of this. You can choose a lower carb option, or you can maybe split the portion and when you go home, you add in or you doctor up and add something that is heart healthy fats and maybe, better good quality proteins, and you create for yourself a more balanced type of food. And then next up here, I don't love the percentage daily value. It always makes my head hurt a little bit because it's a little confusing to understand how this is, but it's basically telling you what this food item contributes towards your needs for the day. And it is based on a 2,000 calorie diet. So if you see something that indicates 5% or less, then that means it's a low amount of that particular item, or 20% or higher is a higher amount of that item. And it's not always a bad thing to be higher. For instance, I have a note here about the recommended allowance for us as far as calcium is concerned per day is about 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams. And this particular food item provides us with 260 milligrams. So that is why it's saying this will give you about 20% of your needs for the day as far as calcium is concerned. Next up is the ingredients list. This can be kind of confusing too. I'm going to share some examples of this coming up too. One of the things I tend to say is, well, first of all, when you're looking at ingredients list, you're looking at it in order of weight or volume. So as if you're seeing here on screen, right? So say that was a cup of pasta, a half a cup of whole wheat, a quarter cup of carrots, 2 tablespoons of chicken broth. So it goes in order incrementally of volume or weight. But one of the things I was going to say is a lot of people will say things like, if I can't pronounce it, or if it's something my grandma or grandpa couldn't pronounce, then I shouldn't eat it. And that's not always true. And I'll show you a couple examples in a sec, because those could just be chemical names for vitamins and minerals that exist, but it's just a different word that seems a little hard to pronounce. And this is where you would just be conscientious if you're keeping mind of anything like additives or sweeteners. So here are a handful of examples of what ingredients lists look like on the internet and also on labels. So this is a prepared meal. It has flank steak as the first thing, and it's explaining to you the definition of it without antibiotics. And then it goes on to share with you all of the other ingredients that are in that in order of weight or volume. This next thing, I think this might be a piece of bread or a bread product. So this starts with enriched wheat flour, and then it gives you all of the ingredients within that. But then you can also see in the second or third item listed there is sugar and corn syrup. So those could be quite heavy as far as added sugars are concerned, if that's something that you have to be mindful of. Next up, we have, you can't even see where the ingredients listed on this thing. It's very small on the bottom left. Peanuts. That's it. Peanuts and a little pinch of salt, and you got yourself some peanut butter. And then here you can see sometimes little bold things, especially if it's going to be related to an allergen, which I'll explain in a second, or it'll say on the bottom contains something. So again, just keeping an eye out if those are things you need to be aware of. And this is just an example of a carton of almond milk. They explain their language of proprietary almond milk and then the ingredients that are included in it. And here's a good example of what I was just talking about, tocopherol. That's just vitamin E. So if your grandma or grandpa can't pronounce tocopherol, that might just be an education or a speech problem, not so much a nutrition issue. Okay, next up, hot topic, sugar. So in this case, we're talking about added sugars, what the manufacturer is putting into the food that doesn't appear naturally. So not like a banana or blueberries that already come with sugar in them. That is going to be already in the carbohydrate section, but that little pull down section that you saw earlier of what the total added sugars are. My friends, there are a lot of words. There are a lot of words for sugar. So this is table sugar. This is 4 calories per gram. Most of them you can see end in the prefix OSE, but a lot of them are a bunch of different words too. So this is when you're looking at the ingredients list, again, not just the order in which you're seeing the ingredient appear, but how many times you see a version of sugar be listed as well, if that's something that you need to keep in mind. For those of you who maybe do sugar-free, calorie-free, or low sugar options, there are things known as sugar alcohols or artificial sweeteners or sugar substitutes. And on this next slide, I'll give you some examples of the language or the words that you can see from those two. So these are ones that are usually very, very minimal calories or no calories, but they're some more chemically structured in a way that is not necessarily natural, with the exception of the ones on the right. Those are fruit derivatives or naturally derived type of sweeteners that still don't have any calories to them. My only issue here is if you're going to do this, just again, how much of too much is anything? We tend to say in our conversations around food and nutrition, these can be a little tricky on the gut. So if you have a sensitive GI, or you're consuming quite a lot of sugar-free products, I would say just, back off every now and then and give your gut a break, because your gut is very sensitive. So speaking of allergens, like I mentioned before, we have 9 major food allergens. You can see in that wheel, they're all listed there. I kind of think of, when I test my students on this, I think of like, if I'm going down the grocery aisles, where do all of these things exist? And so when it comes to allergens listed on a food label, they have to appear in plain language. So for example, like you see in the bullet there, if there's something known as whey or lecithin, in parentheses, the manufacturer has to explain what that means, because not everybody knows that lecithin is a soy derivative, and that if somebody has a soy allergy, that is going to be an issue. You'll see here too, as you saw, I think in that example label earlier, that they could also list it next to the ingredients, like contains wheat, milk, or soy as an example, or it might say something like this product is manufactured in a factory that also does these types of allergens, because that's a cross-contamination issue. And if somebody does have severe allergies, they might not want to take a chance in that. Next up, we have health claims. So we're talking about things that are on the front of packaging and these approved health claims. Trick image that I gave you here, this is not an approved health claim. You are not allowed to put on a package that somebody can lower their cholesterol by 4% in 6 weeks. You can't make a statement like that. So a few years back, the powers that be at the FDA and the USDA went through a lot of these things and told manufacturers, no more, you can't do that. But here's what you can do. You can put on your packaging actually scientific-based evidence if there are ingredients that are proven to show that they can reduce the risk of something. So for an example, you can say this item contains calcium and vitamin D. These things are known to support your bone density health for osteoporosis. The next one could be something like, well, in this case with cholesterol, it could say this product contains monounsaturated fats, or it's high in fiber, and these things are known to reduce your risk of cholesterol or help manage cholesterol. So again, they're allowed to have certain claims like that on the front of packaging, but they can't say something specific like that because that is not approved. And then speaking of things on front packaging, I always say front is fiction and back is fact. The front stuff is all the fun things and the cute designs and the imagery and the language that entices you, and it's very sensationalized sometimes as well, but they're not really well defined. Like, we don't have a definition of what natural means. We don't even have a definition of what made with whole grains means. It just means, okay, the things with whole grains, but is it 100% whole wheat? Or does it have a little bit of ingredient that comes from a whole grain? Like, so what? What does that mean? Even things like keto is technically a medical treatment for people with epilepsy or seizures. So they follow a keto diet, and that is a very specific ratio of carbs and fats and proteins to reduce their frequency and severity of those seizures. For now, right now, we translate it into more of like a trend, a diet that people will implement for weight management or other purposes. So if it's keto friendly, again, we're thinking it's probably more low carb, but again, we're not really defining, well, how many carbs is it and how much other stuff is it? So just being conscientious that not everything that's indicated on the front of the packaging is always going to be 100% spot on. So again, front is fiction, back is fact, but I'm going to share with you in a second. That's going to change maybe in a future moment. Here's an example. I shared this with one of my students in one of my classes, I should say, that I got a little heated with this. This is exactly what I'm talking about, right? We have General Mills that posted information, this marketing stuff, right? Cinnamon Toast Crunch contains more zinc than a serving of chia seeds, and Kix cereal provides more vitamin B6 than a cooked pumpkin. I'm not opposed to people including a wide variety of foods and being flexible with their diet and enjoying cereal. That's totally fine. But with that vitamin B6, with that zinc, you're also getting a ton of added sugar, and I wouldn't necessarily consider this to be a balanced meal. So, in moderation and having education and sharing information like what I'm doing with all of you as well, I think is very important. I had a client that actually said to me she purchased a bag of chocolate chip muffins purposely because it said it contains something like includes 1 serving of vegetables, and there was like broccoli powder or something in the ingredients. Again, to each their own. I'd rather you eat the actual broccoli because it's not as processed. It's going to have a lot more nutritional value to it. But I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, substitute your broccoli with a bowl of Cheerios or a chocolate chip muffin. I hope that some of you might agree with me. Okay, next up, I'm going to share with you, hot off the press. This is not yet official, but may be coming soon, in parentheses. There is a proposed front of package nutrition labeling in process right now. So if you want to share your thoughts about this in the chat, let me know. I just said front of packaging is fiction, and when you turn it over and read all the nutrition information, that's the factual stuff that you're seeing, ingredients, etc. But now they're saying they want to maybe implement this little quick stamp on front that can help a consumer immediately make a decision, especially if they are looking for those kind of top 3 things, salts and fats and sugars. So what are your thoughts about this? Would that help you not have to turn it around and just be able to see on the front of a package that there's a little sticker or a label already integrated in there of making more informed choices? So again, TBD, but you heard it here first, I hope. I broke the news to you. All right, so now we're going to talk specifically about chronic conditions. So here's where I'm going to spend a little bit more time giving you some guidance if you are managing or know somebody who's managing these conditions or are at risk for these things. We have diabetes and some of the things that you can look for on the labels when it comes to helping you manage your blood sugar. Hypertension, which is high blood pressure. Again, most of that is directly related to sodium content. And specifically takeout foods or packaged goods. It's very rare that somebody can put that much salt on. I mean, challenge accepted if you're heavy-handed, but it's very rare that somebody can put that much salt on their meals if they have control over what they're cooking at home. It's more about the ongoing intake of takeout foods, packaged goods, etc. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Cholesterol, heart health issues, saturated fats, and also, so the stuff you want to avoid or limit saturated fats with stuff you want to increase, like fiber, that's going to help with slowing that cholesterol down and helping with the heart health management. And then that last one with the bottom, I just mentioned before with the sugar alcohols for anybody who has GI issues, gastrointestinal issues. I didn't go into detail with this because we have a kidney disease webinar that's already up on the YouTube channel. You can dive a little deeper in there if you want to. But kidney disease is kind of tricky depending on what stage you're in. You might have to actually look at a variety of different things on those labels. We call them the 3 Ps. That's potassium, phosphorus, and protein, depending on what your labs are, depending on what your doctor and dietitian are working with you as far as your meal management is concerned. And you might have to, well, you probably also have to look at sodium content too, because that is also directly related to kidney issues. Sweeteners, I said before, fiber, pros and cons of fiber if you're dealing with GI stuff. Sometimes it can exacerbate something, like if you have Crohn's disease or IBS, these are things that you might want to just keep in mind when you're looking at foods. So let's start first with the diabetes discussion. We're talking about taking a look, and yes, we're going to focus specifically on carbohydrates, fibers, and total added sugars when you're dealing with your diabetes, because this is what's going to indicate if you are doing something especially called carb counting, where you have to kind of keep track of how many carbs you're eating in a meal, especially if you're doing injections with insulin or using some form of insulin or medication where you have to dose versus what you're taking in. So there's something called net carbs. If you take a look at the total carbohydrates there, that's 37 grams. I've done the math for you already. And then you take a look at the fiber at 4 grams. If you are keeping track of your carbohydrates for diabetes or blood glucose control, you have what's known as a net carb. So you just subtract the fiber from the total carbs, and that gives you 33. The higher the fiber, the better, but not everybody can really take a lot of fiber in at one time without getting constipated or having some tummy trouble. But usually something like 3 or 4 grams of fiber in a packaged food item is pretty good. You can also see here, just a side note, it does include 10 grams of added sugar. So that's the excess amount of stuff. So here is where I would say, if you have an option to buy without the added sugar and go home and doctor it up yourself, or forego it and just try to get used to things that are not necessarily sweetened for you, like this could very well be a package of oatmeal or something, I'll take it home and I'll put my own berries and things on it and make my own flavors out of that. Okay, now we're moving into hypertension, cholesterol, heart-related things, and the recommended dietary allowance. I'll share a little bit more about that too. So when it comes to sodium and cholesterol, I'll explain a little bit that coming up. But as far as packaged goods go, or takeout items, I guess we could say as well, like sandwiches and things, these are what is known as your salty six. So the more you can limit these things, the better your chances are of being able to regulate and manage your blood pressure. And again, blood pressure is related to your heart, but it's also related to your kidneys too. So here is something that maybe you know already or you don't. Just like I showed you with the net carbs with the diabetes discussion, we have what's known as net sodium in your hypertension or anybody who's regulating sodium salt intake. So here you have 850 milligrams listed in the sodium line, and then you have potassium at 510 milligrams. I know I got science students in here, so bonus points if you know why this matters, but for anyone else, this is what's known as intra and extracellular fluid shifts, right? Sodium draws the water in, which is why you feel kind of puffy, bloated, your pants get tight after you eat a really salty meal. And potassium helps excrete that fluid out of your system. So if you are being mindful to a limit of a certain amount of sodium per day, you can actually do like you see here, this calculation on screen where you subtract the potassium from the sodium and you end up with a net amount that can help you guide that whatever your choices are that you're making there. I also like what I call like the 2 times rule. So another way to look at this too, if the potassium is not listed or you just want to keep this in mind, is usually a good rule of advice or a rule of thumb is that the number listed next to sodium should be no more than 2 times the amount of the calories. So we're talking about two different types of units of measurement. Calories are calories, sodium are milligrams. But you can see there, if you multiplied 160 by 2, it doesn't meet the 230, so you're good. This is kind of like a comparable amount. If it was 320 or higher, or 600 or 1100 milligrams of sodium, I'd be like, that is a lot to take in for one particular food item. So if there's an option for you to go look for a low sodium option or buy something like that, and then again, doctor it up at home with different seasonings and flavors, I would probably opt for that too. Next up, related to heart health, cholesterol, etc. Here you have a few things listed too. So you have the total fats with the saturated fats underneath it, because total fats can include unsaturated, which are heart healthy. Saturated fats are solid at room temperature and can increase your risk of things like stroke and artery issues and heart attacks, etc. Then you have cholesterol listed there too. Pop quiz for anybody who wants to put it in the chat. What has more cholesterol in it? An egg or an avocado? An egg or an avocado? Which one has more cholesterol in it? Right? Because there's a lot of fat in both of those things, an egg or an avocado. We're talking serving per serving, and you can add that in the chat. And again, in the interest of time, I'm just going to jump ahead. Trick question. Only animal products have cholesterol. Haha. An avocado is high in fat, but it's high in unsaturated fat, which is actually very heart healthy. So no worries about eating your avocado. I mean, it's calorie dense, but it's good for you. Then you have the fiber in there too. So like I said before, when you're looking at foods with fiber in it, that helps slow the digestion, that helps with decreasing, again, the cholesterol, kind of taking it away and getting rid of it. So that can be a heart healthy item to have in there, and taking a look at that. When it comes to sat fats, not much you can do there. Trans fats used to be a thing, but they're banned in the US now. I think it was 2018 when we got rid of those. So even for some reason, they're still listed on the labels, because I think in trace amounts, they appear naturally in some foods, but for the most part, you won't see them anymore. That's what's known as like partially hydrogenated vegetable oils and things that are created in that way that, again, can affect your heart. So they get rid of those things. We don't have that anymore. So just a quick note about cholesterol here too. Previously, the recommended dietary allowance for cholesterol was set at 300 milligrams per day for healthy adults. And then you would talk to your doctor or your dietitian about what what you needed during the day to make sure if you were managing a heart-related issue. But current guidelines, we've noticed it's not as big of an issue anymore. So for those of you who are really worried or looking at cholesterol on a food label, you don't have to do that anymore. And if your doctors and dietitians are guiding you in that direction too, I just say push back a little bit with that, because current science indicates that what is known as dietary cholesterol is not as problematic as the stuff that is listed here, like your sat fats and your sodiums. So that means if you have an egg or you have a dairy product or even a piece of meat, obviously we don't want to go overboard, especially if we're dealing with issues like that, that we can be feeling a little bit safer with the foods that have naturally occurring cholesterol in them versus a food that has some excess saturated fat or high levels of saturated fat. In the fiber thing, I just wanted to point out, not everybody knows what fiber is. So we have soluble and insoluble fiber. Soluble is kind of like, I think of a squishy sponge that washes away stuff. And your insoluble fiber is kind of like your Brillo pad, which scrubs things away. So your soluble fiber, these are all things that are found in plant items. So fruits and different kinds of vegetables like beans and lentils, legumes, nuts, seeds. And then your insoluble fibers are found in things like whole grains and other kind of like cruciferous vegetables like broccoli. And other plants have kind of a combination of both. Not everything's just one and done. Okay, I thought I'd share on this too. I want to give an example of, so this would be if you're looking for protein, right? Everybody wants protein. So protein right now, making sure you're getting enough of it. And it's hard to get sometimes. This is a company called Daily Harvest. They're a meal service, so they have everything packaged and frozen for you, and you can heat and eat or defrost and make smoothies and things. And just like I was saying before with the front of packaging marketing, as you can see on front here, we have protein smoothie. And then there's a little stamp, 20 grams of protein on this thing. And the poor regular versions, just regular smoothie and whatever. So as a comparison, I can go back and forth with this too. Like I want you to see too, right? The calories on the left-hand side are 350, the calories on the right are 430. Okay, so just keep that in mind for a second. But when you zoom in to the nutrition facts label and you look at 20 grams versus 19, it's like what's the diff? That's so silly. But take a look at what they did with the serving size. So technically, yes, there's more grams in the one on the protein dense one on the left hand side for sure, but they decrease the actual amount of food that you're getting. So like I said earlier, if you're going many hours, or you're trying to plan for yourself what you're having, or you're trying to maintain a certain amount of calories per meal, this could be an issue here for you, or just something you might want to take into account. I also noticed, I mean, the writing's kind of small, maybe you can see that too or not, but I also noticed the sodium for some reason, because these are all just plant-based items and not much as far as additives are concerned. Sodium's up to 260 milligrams on the protein dense version, but 80 milligrams on the one on the right. So again, I don't know why, I don't have the ingredients listed on here as to why that might be, but if you're only looking for one specific nutrient and you're not really looking at anything else, you could be taking into account things that are not necessarily following what your guidance, your own personal guidance is, or things that are actually meeting what you want them to meet. Okay, next up, so I said not everything has food labels on them. So what about foods without labels, like your fresh vegetables or your herbs or single ingredient things, or even things that are like prepared meals? Like you might walk into a salad bar section or a deli counter area where they've done things for you like sandwiches or grab and go items, and those don't have nutrition facts label on them. So if you're trying to be really conscientious about that, there are a few things I'll share with you. On the next slide, we've seen this guy come up before. This website is pretty dense and very comprehensive. So you can, if you're keeping track of a lot of different things for different reasons, you can utilize an option like this where you go onto the government website, the USDA website, Food Data Central, you type in whatever, bread, Swiss cheese, whatever it is, if you don't have a label on it, and you get a listing of nutrient analysis from that thing. There's also a ton of different apps. I mean, My Fitness Pal, I think, is one where it has a good, decent database in there too. So if you're really concerned, and again, I'm not talking about like there's a barcode on something that you can scan or an already listed list of ingredients and nutrient facts available to you. I'm talking about other things that don't have the kind of labels that you might want, or single items like, an orange. You might want to know how much sugar is in an orange or a banana, and you can check out some guidance like this through these websites or other types of apps that are available. We're from the future, or you can consult a dietitian. We have databases like this as well. Okay, next up, we're actually coming to the end of our conversation. Like I said, I was trying to get through a very high level of things, so this leaves us with a good amount of time if you have any questions that you want to share. But at the end of every webinar, I always like to kind of just encourage you to reflect on what you've learned, or maybe what you've validated for yourself, and think of what you might want to start doing, what you want to keep doing, and what you want to stop doing. Maybe you've not taken a look as in detail with labels when you're going shopping. So maybe that's something you want to start doing. Maybe you are really curious and conscientious about that, and that's something that you're like, good for me. I'm being an educated consumer and I can keep on doing that now. And then if you want to stop doing something, think about different ways of how you're creating your meal plans for yourself. Like we said before with that salty 6, that's very high, intense amounts of sodium content that maybe you can have a little bit more control over, or opt for a low sodium version, or decrease the amount of takeout that you're getting. I mean, I know, times are tough and it's easy to be convenient, but just be conscientious of whatever you're putting into your body, of what fits in your grocery cart or your grocery bag, and how the effects of it within your control that can affect your health outcomes down the line. Just take those things in mind. So I hope that that's been helpful and useful for you. I'm going to go through a couple other things here just to show you. Next slide, like I said, if you have any questions or feedback, you can toss them in the chat right now. This is a great opportunity, since I feel like I whizzed through that. I was so nervous about going over time, and I actually went under quite a bit. But our next webinar is going to come up next month. So we tend to do these, I think it's the second Thursday of every month. I know in the last webinar, for those of you who attended last webinar, what did we do? Oh, the breakfast ideas one we did last month. I did announce that I'm no longer going to be doing these monthly. It's been quite an overwhelming amount of work. I think I put in between 6 to 10 hours of research for every one of these webinars. Sometimes I'm very grateful to have nutrition students or volunteers working for me, but my schedule's just gotten a little cuckoo, and I feel like it's time to ease off. But that said, we have a ton of things. So here's a shameless plug for you. I'm on YouTube all the time. I put a lot of content on there, and there's even playlists for stuff like this too. So you can check out the one that is called the meal planning one. There's also one that is specific to hypertension, blood pressure. It's called Taking Off the Pressure. So you can take, these are all free, available to you, lots of good quality stuff, hours and hours of content that's available to you on the YouTube channel. And honestly, I would love for you to find and follow me on there. I'm really trying to save my mental health a little bit more these days and try not to be so much on the usual social media platforms like Instagram, Facebook, etc. I'm not doing well on there. So I would rather go just hang out on YouTube. It's a great search engine and lots of content for me and also my peers, my colleagues, and I find really educational, informational things. So please find, follow me, subscribe, like, share with your friends, etc. And then do I have one more on here too? Yes, I do. I mentioned before that I am in private practice. So I run it's a very part-time private practice, about 12 to 20 hours a week, depending on the month. And I see a wide variety of patients. It's all telehealth. And I think I have it written down here. Do I? Yes. Since it's virtual, I can meet with anybody who is in Arizona, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Michigan, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Texas, and Virginia. That's a lot of places I can hang out and check out with, if you need my help or people who need my help. I do take insurance, so it's not like you have to pay out of pocket. And if you do have to pay out of pocket, we have ways around helping support you if it's a financial hardship. I would love to be of service to you however you need me to be, or for the people that you want to put in touch with me. When we're done with this in a couple of days, like I said, I'll send out the recording and a thank you for showing up, and I'll give the links of where you can find me if you want to set up an appointment with me going forward for however long you need. All right, my friends, on that note, I'll just share some resources and resources that I went through in order to give you this science-based, evidence webinar. And let me just quickly check in the chat. Well, look at Chatty. Okay, hold on a sec. Everybody's chatting in here. Hello, hi everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, good day, wherever you're chiming in from. Yes, thank you, Eric. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Elizabeth. Exactly. I know. I know, Deborah. Deborah, I did a webinar a while back and I recorded that one too. And I used the sugar slide. If anybody knows Star Wars, right? There's like the opening credits come up like this, and I did the sugar like that. I was just like, these are the thousands of names of sugar. It was very dramatic. And again, science nerds and sci-fi nerds, I guess, alike. If you're going to, so let's see, if you're going to eat sugar, simply more a natural sugar like raw sugar. So yeah, sugar is sugar, unfortunately. I mean, there's definitely, so I would say something like honey has some nutritional value to it, but I wouldn't necessarily say get your nutrition from sugar. The substitute stuff, as I said before, that stuff is just a little tricky. So, when we talk about chemicals, chemicals are in everything. I'm a chemical, you're a chemical, my computer is a chemical, there's chemicals in everything. But it's more like how much of too much is something that becomes kind of toxic or meets a threshold that makes you feel super sensitive or have an intolerance to. So that's where I would probably say if you're always opting for low sugar or sugar-free things, depending on what your condition is, maybe do something with just the regular sugar just to kind of alleviate any gut issues. But again, in moderation for anything. So I appreciate that question. It's such a tricky thing to converse about because, so when we say like a natural version of sugar, I would say, smash up some banana and that's natural. It's not added table sugar. Everything that's going through that processing or refinement isn't going to be great. But, there are some hierarchies, but quite literally your body doesn't really know the difference sometimes. Okay, yeah, Deborah. So this is a good question about the egg stuff. Okay, so this is like the joke of the year, right? Are eggs affordable anymore? So I tend to cut my eggs. Like number one, I have cholesterol issues. Number two, I just said eggs aren't that big of a deal with cholesterol management. But number three, it's pricey. So I usually also buy a carton of egg whites. When food manufacturers sell their goods, like if you look at whole milk versus a 1% milk, it's based on the fat content too. So you're paying more because it's a more higher quality type of food item in the egg versus the egg whites only. So I'll add egg whites to my eggs. Like today I had an omelet. So I cracked one egg And this is lasting me twice as long in my, when I buy a dozen. So I cracked one egg and then I put 2 servings of my egg whites. So I added the protein without the cholesterol because the cholesterol is just in the yolk. So yeah, pricing, budget, all of these things can be an issue. Yeah, thank you, Johanna. Thank you. Always something to learn. I really appreciate that. Yes, exactly, Johanna. See, that's something that I think is just like that fear mongering stuff. Like, oh, we're so afraid of all of these chemicals and stuff. Well, oh gosh, what is it? Monohydroxide, right? That's just like water. Like if I were to tell you the chemical name of stuff, you would never want to eat anything. So don't be afraid of these things that you can't quote unquote pronounce. Just know what they are or ask people. So just because something's really long. And also, oh gosh, I think it was in I can't remember one of the past webinars. Sometimes when food undergoes processing, right? So like we said before, left-hand side, right-hand side of that slide, things are maybe more processed in snack forms, or if there's a lot of like stripping away of stuff. Then the manufacturer will add back in the stuff that it got rid of. So it'll add back in. So that's what's known as fortification. It'll add back, or no, enrichment. It'll add back in what it lost, or it'll fortify it with something it never had to begin with. So some of the examples are like, enriched whole wheat. So it's stripped away, but then they added some stuff to kind of make it more robust and more nutrient dense. Or orange juice with calcium. Calcium isn't normally found in oranges, or it is very, very small. So they're adding calcium in there. So again, sometimes the food processing, they have to list every single thing on the ingredients list if they, abide by the criteria of what they're putting on the label. So sometimes it can look really scary if it's an arm's length long. And especially, I didn't point it out, but one of those labels I showed earlier were vegan chicken nuggets. I don't do animal meats really. Like I do fish, but not chicken, poultry, beef, etc. So that's a very highly processed food. It's made out of wheat and it's smashed down to look like chicken nuggets and then it's got breading on it and stuff. So if I were being super hyper focused on all of the things that are listed on my food products, I might not be able to have foods that I enjoy. And I really like having those cute little chicken nuggets in my salad sometimes. So thank you, everybody. Oh, Eric, I really appreciate that. I My goal is to get to 500 subscribers by the end of this year because I've been on YouTube for close to 5 years now, and I think 500 subscribers is ridiculously low. But then kind of like the saying in social media is if 500 people showed up to my house, I'd be like, that's a lot of people. So I have to be very grateful for the people who are there. And I'm up to, my goal is 500, but I think I just hit 300 recently. And I'm really trying to shift there. I actually just started a whole new side series called The Side Dish. Get it? Dish with Dina, the side dish. And so actually, let me stop sharing this so we can all see maybe each other's faces and things. I'm trying to be really focused on my energies there because I feel, again, it's a good search engine. Like that's where people go to look up stuff versus Instagram, Facebook, like the algorithms don't really drive traffic to you or aren't as great when you're searching for things. So I appreciate all the feedback. Thanks, Elizabeth. Exactly, exactly. Yes, yes, yes. Yep, exactly. By the way, Elizabeth, some of that stuff you can take and pocket for some exams that you might have in some of your future classes. That's a good rule of thumb. That's how I remember that too. Vicky, thank you. That's so nice. Are there any healthy real chicken? Exactly. Like I don't know how do we define healthy, right? If you're looking based on your needs, sodium, salt, sugar, fat, etc., then it's what it is for you. If I look at my overall intake, like I try to look at that 80-20 rule. If my overall intake based on a day, on a meal, on the week, if 80% of it is mostly whole foods, plant-based items, then 20% of my foods can be whatever, fun things, ice cream, processed stuff. I'm going to probably do a whole workshop or conversation around ultra processed foods because that's another thing that is technically it's defined by category, but within those categories are things like infant formula, right? So we don't want to vilify foods that are nutritious for different populations just because they are processed. So I want to make sure I also clarify some of that. And again, take away some of the stigma or the fear around foods that are just naturally in our lives and that might be good quality, good nutrition, and convenient for us. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Oh, I'm so glad. I'm glad that you were here. Like I said, we usually have about 20 or 30 people that register, and this is actually a good turnout. So it was nice to be on the screen with all of you. You saw some of the information I left before. Find, follow me wherever I am on the social media, the internet platforms, and keep an eye out in a few days where I'll send you a follow-up email and you can send a survey back to me. I very much appreciate everybody for being here. Eat well, be well, everyone. Bye.